I want you to take just a minute and listen. Because right now, Satan is whispering in your ear. And by that I mean this. He is telling you that it's all right for you to be in here. And it's all right for you maybe even to say amen. As long as you don't change anything when you go home. You see, folks, apathy is one of his greatest weapons. When you look at it, at what is going on in society today, we see a very distinct pattern. We see Christians who are very quick to shake our finger and point at things in the Bible and say, hey, that was a command. Why didn't they do that? Let me give you an example of what exactly I'm talking about here. Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 to 17. Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. We look at that from a 21st century perspective. And we say, how in the world could Adam and Eve have been so foolish? That is so crystal clear. God said, do this, don't do that. I mean, couldn't be more clear. And yet, folks, what I'm here to tell you this morning is that God's commands are always crystal clear. It's not a situation where He was clear in the garden, but we don't really know what He expects of us today. Oh, we know. The question is, are we going to do it? Notice this. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. And you fathers. Let me restate that. And you fathers. Do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. He is telling us, fathers, to do this. Psalm 145 verse 4. One generation shall praise your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. And you fathers, don't eat of this tree. You can eat of every tree in the garden except this one. Oh, we get that. We see that. We understand that. All Satan had to do was say, you're not going to die. In fact, you'll be just like God. And today he is whispering us again, you don't really need to do this. You don't really, dads in this room, you don't really need to train up your kids. Let's just turn them over to anybody, society. You don't think he's crystal clear? Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22, verse 6. Again, everybody in here has probably heard multiple sermons on this passage, but I want to give it to you in a way in which I hope you will forever remember it. The very first word in this verse, train, comes from the Hebrew word shanach. And it means quite literally to put a bit in the mouth of a horse. Now folks, remember, the Bible is inspired. Why in the world would the inspired writer use that word? Shanach a child in the way he should go. Well, folks, we're in Oklahoma. What happens when you put a bit in the mouth of a horse and you pull the rein to the left? That 1-ton animal, he goes to the left, doesn't he? You pull it right, he goes right. You pull back, what's he do? He stops. You know what he's saying? He's telling us there may be times where we have to pull our children to the left or to the right. In fact, we may have to pull back and make them rethink their actions. But that's our job. Just like Satan was talking to Eve in the garden, he is whispering to us. He is saying, betray your children, bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of society. Just let them be like everybody else. Let them go participate in everything that everyone else is doing. Don't make them distinct. After all, somebody might call them weird. They might call them strange. We want our kids to fit in. Let them try out for cheerleading practice. Let them go to prom. And you fathers. We get fired up. If you think about it for just a moment, we get fired up as a culture when a history book is written that basically gives 3 pages to George Washington Carver and completely neglects George Washington. This was done not too long ago. There was a history book that was produced, and they completely left George Washington out. Now, according to the websites and the blogs and all the interaction, the reason they left Washington out is because of his overtly Christian beliefs. The fact that he believed in a God and believed the Bible was divine. We get fired up. We are so angry. How in the world could they leave out the first president of the United States out of our history book? Here's a question. How fired up have we gotten about the fact that the Father is left out of every textbook? Listen to me, church. Don't you wag your finger at something like this. When Jehovah God is not given credit for creating this universe. He is not given credit for creating man from the dust of the ground. George Washington, on the grand scheme of things, is just a small little speck of sand. You want to write a textbook and talk about something horrible, an abomination? It's leaving out God. And you fathers are leaving a legacy. Let me ask all the parents in this room, what legacy are you leaving? Because you see, the fact of the matter is, every set of eyes that I'm looking at this morning, every single one of you is leaving a legacy. It may be a great legacy. You may have generations come after you that are preachers, that are elders. You may have people that come after you that quite literally will pen books and will create multimedia that generations are able to solidify their faith from for years and years and years and years to come. Or your legacy may be different. Your legacy may be one of that split in the road. Robert Frost, you remember? The road less traveled. Your legacy may be that your children jump on the wide road, the road that everybody else is jumping on, and they may simply blend into the culture. And then when you hit 60 or 70 years of age, and you're sitting in a setting like this, and you're listening to a preacher talk about the fact that we've lost our kids, those tears start rolling down your face because you realize you've left a legacy. What kind of parent are you? This morning, what I'd like for us to do is I want us to talk about parenting specifically, honing in on what we call deliberate parenting. All kind of parents out there. We've got, for instance, the absent parent. Now, as I'm talking about these various types of parent, what I'm hoping you honestly will do, what I really want you to do, is I want you to look inside yourself. And please understand, as I'm preaching this lesson, folks, I am stepping on my own toes, probably twice as hard as I'm stepping on anybody else's. Are you an absent parent? And by that I mean, this is a parent who basically has relegated all the responsibilities of training, of teaching their children to somebody else. Example. We get up in the morning. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane because we got to get out to the bus by 7 o'clock. So there's a tornado of action going through the house as we try to get lunches together and we try to make sure we got shoes that match and get them onto the bus. And on the bus they go. And for the next 9 hours, they will be sitting at the feet of individuals who may or may not even believe in a God. They will be reading textbooks that most definitely do not give any credence to God. In fact, I would say, listen to me, church, I would say we just sent them off to Babylon. And then they come home. And we may or may not be at home. It depends on our work schedule. In fact, for the most of us, they're going to be at home for approximately 2 hours before we hit the driveway. Maybe sitting there in front of a video game. No, we don't have anything cooked for dinner because after all, we don't get home until 6. So we throw the bucket of chicken on the table. Everybody grabs it. They go off and do their thing. You're exhausted. You're tired. You've been working all day. You go off and do your thing. We may have said a prayer around the chicken. But other than that, folks, this is called absent parenting. One of the most tragic sights that I've seen. I get the opportunity to travel quite a bit and I eat by myself a lot. My wife feels sorry for me. I actually enjoy it because I people watch. I'll sit in a restaurant. I usually have a book or something with me, eating a meal. On one occasion, I watched a family come in. It was a family of 4. They walked into a restaurant and never spoke a word to each other. One child had a handheld video game he was playing the entire time. The only time he spoke was when he gave the waiter his order. Daughter was plugged in. Daughter had earphones. Mom and dad had smartphones. They were texting, emailing, and talking on the phone. This is a family of 4 that never said one word to each other. That's absent parenting, folks. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 15. A child left to himself bring forth shame to his mother. I worked in the emergency department at Vanderbilt Hospital for several years. Folks, they would roll people into that hospital who had done things that are absolutely unmentionable. You're talking about people that would shoot each other over a bag of potato chips. And when you looked in their eyes, you could see darkness all the way to China. A child left unto himself bring forth shame to his mother. Second type of parenting is haphazard. It's kind of the shotgun approach. You don't really have a vision. You don't have a plan. What you do is you kind of piecemeal it. You know, this week we feel like we're going to be spiritual, so we're going to try to get on board. And next week we've got so much going on. You got exams. You got soccer. And so we piecemeal it. And the reality of it is we don't have any set plan that basically is, my child is in kindergarten. I want to make sure when they hit 18, they're ready to fight the good fight. It's because of our busy lives. Haphazard parenting, summed up in these 2 words, mom's taxi. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's hard to be a deliberate parent. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done. Listen to me, church. My family travels with me about half the time. When I go out, you know, you can have Bible time, you can have singing time, you can have a devotional in a car. I've done it in some weird places, let me tell you. But I do know this, I do know it's harder. And if we're not conscious of it, what we do is we start doing this haphazard. We got to be here, we got to go there. And all of a sudden, any type of spiritual plan or vision gets pushed to the back. Number 3 is abusive parenting. We got some folks that basically have taken the attitude of, you know what, I'm going to make sure my child gets to heaven. And the way I'm going to do it is, I'm going to cram it down his throat. And the minute our child leaves the home, they are gone. Did you notice where it said fathers? We're not to provoke our children to wrath. We're to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. As you look at this, ask yourself very seriously, are you trying to bully your children? Force your children to be spiritual. Because folks, if you are pushing them into a box, eventually that box is going to explode. The next one is spineless parenting. And if I had to put my finger on one that I think is going on big time today, this would probably be it right here. We've got a lot of homes in the church where the children are making the rules. You know how I know that? When you ask a family, hey, is your teen, are they coming to the devotional tonight? Or are they going to camp? You know what I hear? I hear parents who say, I don't know, I haven't asked them. Excuse me? You haven't asked them? Who's running your house? The parent ought to be the one to make that decision. We got parents who have quite literally just turned the reins over, and their kids are making all the decisions. Let me share with you very quickly. I was in a congregation in Alabama just a couple of weeks ago. I was talking to a young man who was working with the family and the youth. They had planned something for families and youth. They were excited, fired up. Everybody was making commitments to be there. They bought food. They were to have over 35 young people and their families in their home. The day of this particular activity, the very day, one of the kids decides that he wants to go with a denominational person to a skating rink. They began to text each other. Only 5 people showed up at this guy's house that night. They all bailed. But folks, let me tell you what, their parents let them bail. We got some spineless parents. We got kids who are telling their parents what they're going to wear. We got kids who are telling their parents what they're going to watch. What kind of video games they're going to play. That's not parenting. That's called spineless. The next one is friendly parenting. And I guess if I had to have a close second, this might be it. And that is a person who basically wants to be friends with their kids. Well, let me remind you, God didn't call you to be a friend to your child. He called you to be a parent to your child. In fact, He's only given your child 2 parents. I promise you this, if you are a good parent, that friendship will be there later on. I promise that. As you're sitting there listening to me, ask yourself, in all seriousness, when is the last time our children have heard us say no? We don't say that very much, do we? Folks, our children need to hear us say no. You say, why, Brad? Why? I mean, we're living in the lap of luxury. We're in America. We got all this stuff. Folks, do you realize our Father occasionally says no? And it's for our good. We forget sometimes that commands. It's not God being mean and saying, commands are for our good. They need to hear us say no. Last but not least is where we are this morning, and that is deliberate parenting. Deliberate parenting. A lot of times we get a newborn child. I can still this day, I can remember the very first second that my first son, when he came out, it was actually a cesarean section. My wife couldn't feel anything. She wasn't sure they'd started. I'm an anatomist. Her OBGYN and I were actually having fun kind of pointing out different parts. I know my wife would not appreciate that as much, but it was, it was fun. My child comes out. And at that moment, I remember just being overwhelmed with emotion, but I also remember thinking to myself, what do I do now? Anybody else in here ever felt that? They don't come with instruction books, do they? It's like baby, placenta. Okay, where's the book? Here's the book. Folks, it's not Dr. Spock. It's not some late frazzled book about what to expect from your 1-year-old. It's His book. That's what it's about when we're talking about deliberate parenting. Listen to me. We must, with passion, with zeal, with fervor, we've got to teach our children, to teach their children, to teach their children, to teach their children until Jesus comes back. That's what we do. That is deliberate parenting. And that's what I'm going to do until the last breath leaves my body. I'm going to teach my children. I'm going to play a role, if the Lord allows me, in teaching my grandchildren. We've forgotten that somewhere along the way that our sole job in life is a soul job. Does it matter how far we climb the corporate ladder? Does it matter how many books we've authored? Does it matter how much money we've got in a 501k? Or a 401k tells you how much money I've got in one. I don't even know how. Folks, it's all about returning our children to Him. And yet, I'm afraid we are raising children of Ephraim. If you're looking at that and you're not sure exactly what I'm talking about, please take your Bible in your hand. Turn with me and let's look at Psalm chapter 78. Psalm chapter 78, and listen very carefully to what is going on right here. The children of Ephraim, verse 9, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. Notice this. They didn't keep covenant with God. They refused to walk in His law. They forgot His works and His wonders that He had shown them. The very day that the children needed to step up and be ready to defend, they turned back. They didn't keep the covenant. Is it possible that our kids are doing the same? They hit 18, 19 years of age. They've been in the church their whole lives. And they run off to that very first semester at college. And they take that class called a Survey of World Religions, where the professor tells them, you know what, basically all religions are the same. And they have their faith shattered and they lay down their bows. Or maybe they walk into a world literature class, true count, where a professor tells them that over the next few weeks, he's going to be getting rid of all the little piles of blank that their parents have put in their head. Why? Why would our children at that point lay down their bows? Why would they not defend God? Folks, could it be because they've watched their parents do the same thing? Do we defend Him? Do we turn off the garbage? You know, it blows my mind how you can walk into a house, a Christian home, and you read the words, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." All the while, Desperate Housewives is playing on the television. That, my friends, is garbage. You're not serving the Lord. You're a child of Satan. We got to understand that if we really are going to be deliberate parents, that we're going to have to cast off what the world has told us. We're going to have to go back to the dinner table. Somebody says, wait a second, Brad. Show me where it says you got to sit around a dinner table in this book. Oh, I'll admit freely that there is not a book, chapter, and verse that I can point to that says, in order to have faithful children, you need to sit around the dinner table. I freely admit that, but I also know this book talks about me instilling things in the hearts and the minds of my children. And one of the best places to do that is that right there. And yet, you know what we're doing? Folks, let's be honest. Dinner table, it's going the way of the dinosaur. And now what we do is we travel quickly. And we grab a bite. And in fact, in some people's homes right now, as you're looking at me, your dinner table has got stuff on it. It's got stacks. Go home, clean off the table, and gather your family. And deliberately parent them. Psalm 127 verse 4 is painting this picture for us perfectly. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Again, we ask ourselves, why would an inspired writer use this analogy? Because folks, listen to me. Before that archer ever picks up the bow, before he ever draws the string tight, before he places that arrow between his fingers, he has already sighted his goal, his target. And that target for us, folks, is called heaven. Are we launching our children with determination, with forethought towards that goal that we call heaven? Or are we just haphazardly letting them go? How do you do it? A couple of key points that I want you to write down. Number one, deliberate parenting entails prayer. If you do not pray with your child, for your child, start immediately. In fact, let me tell you what. This needs to start before your child gets on the scene. You need to be praying that you will be a godly parent. You need to be praying that that child will be a righteous warrior. I have a 5-year-old princess. The Lord has blessed me with 4 children. I have 3 boys that are going to be warriors and are going to one day take my place. I've got one little princess. And if you think that you have got a son who is good enough for my daughter, I got a 700-page document that we can talk about you filling out later. Her daddy prays for her, with her. And you know what at 5 years of age we already pray about? We pray about that godly man that God is going to place in her life. At 5. You know why we're doing that? Because when she hits 16 and people start coming around, I want her to remember that God is selecting out that Christian man. And that she is going to be a great Christian wife. We must pray for our kids. Number 2, deliberate parenting entails good example. One of the things that I personally cannot get around is that the man you all see right up here is also the same man that calls Melinda my wife, and Will, Reese, Claire, and Luke my children. And folks, listen to me. If they see a man up in this pulpit that is different than what they see at home, I have failed my job. And I realize most of you in here may not be preachers, and so you're sitting there thinking, okay, this doesn't really apply to me. Folks, listen to me. Your actions will speak a much louder sermon than almost every sermon your children ever hear. We got to set a good example. We got to set an example of what we do with our time, with how we watch, with what we do in devotion to the Lord, with how we study the Word. Because we got to teach our children, to teach their children, to teach their children, to teach their children until Jesus comes back. Number 3, it entails instruction. And Brad, what exactly are you talking about? Let's get specific for just a moment. If you've got your Bibles, open them up to 1 Samuel chapter 3. I'm going to give you some parenting topics, application. Oftentimes in the church what we do is we say, you know, the Bible really doesn't tell us how to parent. Oh, absolutely it does. If we start right here, let me start reading in verse 2. Came to pass, this is 1 Samuel chapter 3, came to pass at that time while Eli was lying down in his place, when his eyes had begun to grow dim, that he could not see, and before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord, where the ark of God was, while Samuel was lying down, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered and he said, Here am I. So he ran to Eli and he said, Here I am, for you called me. And he said, I didn't call. Lie down again. And he went and he lay down. Then the Lord called yet again, Samuel. So Samuel arose, he went to Eli and he said, Here I am, for you called me. A couple of things I want to point out right here. We've got a young boy. We don't know specifically his exact age. Most scholars would put him somewhere between probably 8 and 10. But by 8 years of age, 10 years of age, we need to understand, number one, Samuel obeyed. What do you mean, Brad? He answered, Here am I. He didn't say, what do you want? Mom, my alarm hadn't gone off yet. He said, here I am. Number 2, Samuel was fully respectful by age 8 to 10. And by that I mean this. He ran to Eli. He said, here I am, for you called me. He didn't say, oh man, why are you bothering me? Church, by 8 to 10 years of age, our children need to know how to obey. They need to be fully respectful. And number 3, they need to be responsive to God. They need to already understand that there is a God and that the world revolves around Him and not them. You remember, after going through this situation a couple of times, Eli says, hey, maybe the Lord talking to you. Samuel answered, said, speak, for your servant hears. Here you've got a young man who is already responsive to God. You want application? That's where they need to be when they're 8 to 10 years of age. We're going to pick up in a minute when they get a little bit older. Deliberate parenting entails discipline. You see the picture? I realize in the church today, we don't talk about this very much. You know, we talk about things like our kids need to behave. And folks, you can add newfangled things like timeout all day long, but that doesn't change the Word of God. Proverbs chapter 23. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he'll not die. If you strike him with a rod, you'll save his soul from Sheol. You know, part of the problem in the church? We don't spank our kids anymore. Whoa, did he just say that from the pulpit? Yeah, he did. One of the worst beatings I got in my life. Wasn't a beating. I can say this. My mom is in the room, so I can say this and get away with it. My mom is a fairly short lady. She's 5 foot. She spanked me. I was probably 11, 12 years old. And I remember distinctly for the first time in my life, it didn't hurt. And I smiled. My dad is 6'4". Yeah, when he learned what happened, it was not quite as pretty. Church, listen to me. Developing a healthy amount of fear is a good thing because we can translate that in our relationship to God. We've got kids who do not fear or respect their parents. How do we expect them to have a proper relationship with God if they don't fear or respect their parents? We talked about Romans chapter 1, where Paul is putting disobedient children in the same category as homosexuals, as haters of God, as murderers. You know, there's some people who, again, need to go home, prostrate themselves before God and say, you know what? I haven't been doing it your way. From this day forward, I am. Because I'll tell you what, when I was young, had my parents put me in timeout, God gave me a brain. And I'd be sitting over in that corner trying to figure out, how can I do it next time without getting caught? That's what timeout would have done for me. Thankfully, timeout in my house was the time it took my dad to reach down and grab a belt. And it worked. Deliberate parenting entails consistency and persistence. Church, we got to do it. And we got to do it over and over and over and over and over. Tell a quick story on my kids. I had instructed my children to do something in our house. And I'd instructed them several times because they kept forgetting to do something. And I'd reached that point where basically a parent decides, okay, I got to take it to the next level. And so I gathered my kids. I said, look, if this happens again, you're going to get a spanking because you're not obeying. About 2 days later, it was 9:30 p.m. My kids are already up in bed. I looked around the house. Lo and behold, they had not done what I'd told them to do. Now, picture this for just a moment. My kids are already up in bed. They're quiet. It would have taken me literally 2 seconds to do what I told them to do. I could have done it, gone to bed, everything be hunky-dory. But folks, let me tell you, if I take that route, my children never learn. And so at 9:30, I sat there and wrestled with myself. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to, but I knew I needed to because I love them and their souls. I got them up out of bed, and we had a little Board of Education meeting. And you know what? Since that day, it has never, ever failed to be done the right way. What should we expect from a 12-year-old? We talked about Samuel being 8 to 10. Now let's move forward in our child's life. Let's deliberately parent them through their adolescence. What do we expect from them? Well, take a look. Luke chapter 2. We have the occasion of Jesus left behind in Jerusalem. Take a look with me. I'm going to start reading in verse 41. His parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to the custom of the feast. When they had finished the days as they returned, the boy Jesus lingered behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother did not know it. But supposing him to have been company with, they went a day's journey, and they sought him among their relatives and acquaintances. So when they didn't find him, they returned to Jerusalem seeking him. Now, so it was that after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. How long was Jesus separated from his parents at age 12? Okay, let's do the math. It says they went a day's journey away. Didn't they realize that he's not with them? So they have to do a day's journey back. And then the text says, after 3 days. You know how many that is total? Do you realize you got a 12-year-old who was by himself for 5 days? He had to feed himself. He had to clean himself. He had to take care of himself for 5 days. Now, fast forward to the year 2011. Let's look at our home congregations. Do you think 12-year-olds in our home congregations could do that? What should we expect from a 12-year-old? Number one, we should expect our 12-year-olds to have a sense of responsibility, purpose, and destiny. Again, they need to realize this world does not revolve around them, but rather it revolves around Him. Number two, we should expect our 12-year-olds to have a burning hunger to understand the truth and pursue wisdom. By 12 years of age, our kids need to know or hunger for things like, where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going when I die? You know, part of the problem we've got right now is our kids, they hunger for Mario Brothers. They hunger for Lady Gaga. They don't hunger for this. You think about Jesus Christ. Take a look at the text again. It says in verse 46, they found him sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. Number three, we should expect our 12-year-olds to be totally obedient. By 12 years of age, they should be obedient. Now, why do I say that with this picture? Because, folks, Jesus Christ, He could have gone anywhere and done anything. He's in a city by Himself. He could have gone to the arcade. He could have gone to the red light district. But He went to a place where He had to be on His good behavior, or they wouldn't have allowed Him to stay. Number four, we should expect that our 12-year-olds are consistently respectful. Now, we looked at Samuel. We talked about him being somewhere probably between 8 and 10. And we already threw the respectful word in there. But folks, by 12, that should be quite literally habit. You want me to tell you something that I see consistently in the church? I see elderly people who are afraid to come to worship. You want to know why? Because they're afraid they're going to break a hip when a young child runs past them and they fall. Shame on us, church. Shame on us for not reining our children in when what should be happening is we see that 80-year-old lady hitting the back door. Instead of running her over, how about our 12-year-olds grab her by the arm and lead her to a pew? Totally different scenario, isn't it? You got a kid who thinks only of himself, who wants to play, who does his thing, and he runs by somebody versus a kid who looks up and realizes that is a lady who is a pillar of this congregation. She is a faithful, godly woman. I'm going to make sure she safely gets to her pew. 12-year-old. We should expect them to have a keen sense of discernment, especially with the company they keep. Paul's words, very much applicable today. Do not be deceived, 1 Corinthians. Evil company corrupts good habits. You know, at 12 years old, Jesus is in a place where he quite literally could have gone and hung out with anybody. He could have hung out with the folks that were playing marbles. He could have hung out with the kids who were playing games out in the street. He could have gone down to the river, played in the river. And yet he chose to be with religious scholars. Now, question. When is the last time our kids have looked at a preacher or an elder with that kind of respect, admiration, and wanted to actually hang out with them? They don't. Our kids, they look at elders and they're like, oh, here he comes. I'm going the other way. Again, shame on us because we should be training up future elders. Our 12-year-old should be totally committed to do the will of God. Jesus knew what he was here for. By 12. Now that's not to say that at 12 years of age, our kids have got to have their career and life plotted out. I'm not saying that. My children know I would love for them to follow in my shoes. I hope that the Lord blesses them to be able to do that. But if my child hits 18, 19 years of age and says, you know what, Dad? I really feel like I can use my talents in graphics to maybe take the church to a new level. Folks, as long as they are doing something that is glorifying, I don't care what they do. As long as they keep in the forefront of their mind that the reason they're on this earth is to glorify Him. You know what? If they decide they want to be a garbage collector, as long as they do it to the best of their ability and they keep God first in their life, I'm going to support that decision with every fiber of my being. Because you know how many doctors and lawyers I've seen leave the church? You ask me the question, would I rather have a son that's a garbage collector who's faithful to the Lord, or rather have a wealthy son who is a doctor or a lawyer who is apostate? I'll take the garbage collector 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Thank you very much. Number 7, we should expect our 12-year-old to have an unmistakable godliness in their lives. At 12. And yet, when we look at our modern times, when we look at our kids, folks, we don't see that. We see kids today who are arguing with their parents about prom. We see kids today who are arguing about what they can wear. And folks, I'm not talking about the world, I'm talking about in the church. We see kids today who are making exceptionally poor decisions in what they listen to. Remember Jesus said, what is the greatest commandment? You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind. And yet think about what we're putting into the minds of our kids, folks. We've got kids that are playing video games. Notice this. Rated 18 plus. The reason? Because it has horrible images in it. There was a book written several years ago now by two guys, Alex and Brett Harris. It's called Do Hard Things. I'll warn you ahead of time, there are a few little bones in it. But the overall concept of this book is a very good one, and that is, these are two young people who've realized that society has set the bar so low for young people. Basically, all you got to do is breathe. You know, our kids today, if they make their bed, they think they've done a grand thing. I'm here to tell you, folks, it's time we raise the bar with the expectations of our kids. There used to be a time in this nation when a child would hit 13 years of age, and that was basically the designation that they were becoming a man or a woman. And at that point, they went from being coddled as a child to basically following in the footsteps of their mom or their dad. You know what we've come up with? And listen to me. This is a relatively new term. Teenager. You know what that translates to today? Years of no responsibility. Do we expect much from our teens? We don't expect much from our teens in the church. You know, how is it that we justify our kids going out and buying a $60 ticket to a ball game and they throw a buck in the collection plate and we think that's okay? It's okay, they're teenagers. Excuse me? I didn't realize that there was a teenager clause in the Bible. This book is talking about raising the bar, expecting hard things from our kids. And the reason I even pointed out is because I think it's time that we realize we've been using society's definition in our parenting skills. We get them to about 13, 14. Society tells us they're supposed to rebel and not like mom and dad. And so that's what we let them do. And for the next 5, 6 years in our life, as long as we keep the peace in our house and they do go to worship service with us, we think that's okay. It's not okay. We got to get rid of what society is telling us. And we got to do what this book tells us. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you, that you may live long on the earth. We talked about the fact that there were 4 vertical commandments and that this was the first horizontal. That God put this above in the 10 commandments. He put it above. Don't steal, don't murder, don't commit adultery. And yet, here's what society is doing. Society is helping push our kids away from you. Here's what I mean by that. You look at news incidents. This one actually happened, I believe, about 3 months ago, where you've got a situation where a school had a teenager that wanted an abortion. You know what the school said? You do it our way on our time, your mom and dad can't say anything about it. We'll put you in a cab. We're going to take you to an abortion clinic without ever telling your parents. We are now passing laws that are taking the responsibility of rearing our kids away from parents. I can back it up. Right now there is a treaty that is going before our lawmakers in Washington. It is called the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of a Child. If you don't learn anything else from deliberate parenting, please remember what this is all about. What they are trying to do is they are trying to take the rights for you to parent your child away from you and put it in the hands of the government. Is it serious? Here's how serious it is. There's only 2 countries in the world that haven't passed this treaty, Somalia and America. And because of the fact that it is a treaty, it supersedes every state law. In other words, if Oklahoma wanted to opt out of it, they can't. What's in this thing? Number 1, good parents no longer entitled to the legal presumption that they are that they act in the best interest of their children. The government would have authority to overrule all parents' decisions. Number 2, parents could no longer spank their child even in the home. Number 3, children would have a legal right to choose their own religions. Parents would simply be permitted to give advice. Number 4, children would acquire a legally enforceable right to leisure. I can just see that with my dad. Dad's like, go out and mow the grass. I'm sorry, Father. I have a legal, enforceable right to leisure. Time out. Christian schools that refuse to teach alternative worldviews, that teach Christianity is the only true religion, would violate Article 29 of the treaty. In other words, private schools that think you're exempt, that everything's going to be okay, if they pass this treaty, you're in trouble. You're coming. They're coming for you. It would also allow would not allow their parents to opt out of sex education. Children would have the right to reproductive health information and services, including abortions, without parental consent or knowledge. America would be under a binding legal obligation to massively increase federal spending on children's programs because it states that the nation cannot spend more on defense than a child's welfare. In other words, this treaty says if you spend $10 billion on defense, you now got to spend $10 billion on these kids. And last, a child's right to be heard would allow him or her to seek governmental review of every parental decision with which the child disagreed. Do you think it's serious? Folks, listen to me. They're passing legislation day after day after day that is taking our rights away. And what's funny is, basically, we've been telling them to do that for 15, 20 years. We've been basically saying, we don't really want to raise our kids. We don't love our kids. Here, you deal with them. And now we've woken up and gone, oops, that was not the right thing to do. Give us back our kids. And yet we're looking at things like this. You want your kids to go to heaven? What we've got to do is we've got to deliberately parent them. We've got to teach them diligently His ways. We've got to go back and we've got to understand that our lack of action, inaction, is also leaving that legacy. I hope and I pray that as you go back to your homes, as you go back to your congregations, as you go back to your communities, you'll put some very, very serious thought into how we can equip the family to do the job that God has given us. Thank you very, very much for your attention.